Yeah, so my name's Dani Austin, and working at the Australian Red Cross for about a year and a half. My title, Community Adaptation Project Officer, may become clearer as we go, but yeah. I want to start by saying Namani, Nyadlu Tampenti, Nyadlu Ghana Yatanka Imperendi, which in my very little bit of Ghana is the land I'm on today, and I want to acknowledge wherever you are and their ancestors. So the project really is about climate preparedness, and that will become clearer. So that's the focus on climate adaptation. And the model for the project is really what we're sort of calling a ripple effect. So it's the community rippling out with the message of climate readiness. So there'll be details as we go. I think we'll have questions at the end. So yeah, I'll get going into it. So you can see from the first slide here that these are some of the organisations that I will talk about as we go, because it's very much a partnership project, although I'm from the Red Cross. So if the slides want to change. Oh, there you are. So why adaptation is probably the first thing. And you're all in the climate space, so I'm sure you'll know a lot about it. But this is a great little graph, the only one, although I do love graphs. I'd have lots if I could. And this is from the Climate Action Tracker website. And you can see from here, it's emissions, expectations and scenarios. The black line is where we're up to now. And this just shows this big spread of, we could go anywhere from now with emissions, right? We could curb them drastically, or we could, business as usual or more. And I've added on here, the little black line that you can see come up is obviously sort of rough what we need to be doing globally to be below that, depending on who you talk to, 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees of warming. But then I've put that little box you can see around the blue segment and the red segment are the current policies around the world that governments have. Well, this may have been a year or so ago, and the pledges from those big summits where they meet. So I was really shocked when I saw this graph, because it shows that even if every country meets their policies and pledges, and sometimes those policies and pledges aren't even met, but if they are met, we can see that it's above the safe threshold. So basically, we're most likely locked in to warming, even if we meet policies and pledges that have been put in place. We obviously could be way up into 5, 6, 7 degrees of warming. So the point of this project and talking about climate adaptation now is that there will be some level of change, and we have to get ready for it. So that obviously doesn't take away from mitigation and reducing our emissions. That's obviously super important and has to, be continued. But yeah, this project focuses on the preparedness and adaptation side, and that's linked with the Red Cross as well. So that will make a bit more sense. So yeah, check out that website. It's really good to play with all these graphs they can make. So why the Australian Red Cross? Well, you can see here there's we're in emergency services. That's the field, the team I sit within, and we already talk about emergency preparedness. So there on the left, you can see the Ready Plan booklet, which is about preparing for one-off or ongoing emergencies. And on the right, there's a version of an app, Get Prepared. So the Red Cross is really encouraging the message of emergency preparedness anyway. And some clever spark a couple of years ago in the Red Cross said, well, bushfires and floods and storms and all these and heat waves are going to happen more and with more intensity and more frequency. So we should probably be doing something around this messaging and the fact that we know about climate change. So that was a really great step. So that was in the South Australian Red Cross. They realised, we need to have some messaging about not only one-off extreme events, but how they're going to increase, basically. For the project history, there's the little blurb that it is funded by the Commonwealth, the Department of Home Affairs and the Government of South Australia. And so it was a grant, the Natural Disaster Resilience Program, or everyone just says NDRP. So the NDRP grant, there was money and time put in by the councils I'll mention and the Red Cross, but it's a 2-year project through this grant. So it is coordinated by the Australian Red Cross, but it's in partnership with Resilience South. Now, I don't know about in other states across Australia, but in South Australia, the councils were clustered in 32 little groups of councils to work on resilience and adaptation. So Resilience South is the cities of Hobart Bay, Marion, Mitcham and Onkaparinga. So they work together already on climate resilience, and they call Resilience South. So they're the partnership. So we're trialling this project for 2 years in the collection of so what do we do? What is this project aiming to achieve? Well, we've got socially connected communities. Connection is really important, especially for the Red Cross, that people are not socially isolated but connected. That this is individuals with the awareness and ability to act. So basically personal agency. So if someone in the community, if you want to do something, it's feeling like you feel empowered to do something. And the last overarching sort of theme of the project is a disaster resilient community now and into the future. So it's the and into the future bit, which brings in so much about climate change. Obviously, this project cannot achieve those 3 things on its own. This project is one of many organisations and community groups out there who are feeding into to reach these sort of goals. But yeah, that's the aims I've got to try and remind myself of. That we want connected communities who feel empowered and are disaster resilient. So how do we get that message, this climate preparedness message, to hundreds of people ideally, if not thousands, with me on a part-time role? So we had to think about that. We talked through different ideas. Climate Ready Champions is the one I'll talk about mostly in a moment. We also talked about Climate Ready Schools. So what would it mean to run something with schools and kids about, being more prepared? And Climate Ready Street, which was thinking of a localised level. How could we get literally one street to think about how they might want to be climate ready? The Climate Ready Schools project has gone on and is being run by the City of Onkaparinga and NRM, which is Natural Resource Management Education. So 2 other organisations have started running with Climate Ready Schools. So you could get a presentation from them sometime about it. And Climate Ready Streets is just on hold for now because of a few things, but it is hoped that we can look at a localised level. But we're really keen on doing peer-to-peer learning. People really, behaviour change anyway happens from peer-to-peer. We look at our friends and our family and those around us, and we tend to copy what they do. So that was a real model to get this message out there is through friends and family and networks. And that mentioned ripple effect. If I tell one person, hopefully they tell 3, and then if everyone else tells 3, then it can go quite a long way. And self-organising volunteers. The Australian Red Cross is a big volunteer organisation. We have hundreds and thousands of volunteers who are fantastic. And lots of the volunteers though with the Red Cross, not all, but lots of them are maybe do a day a week in the office to help with projects. But there's a whole pool of people out there in the community. You yourself are probably someone who wants to help out with organisations and volunteer, but you're busy, you have work, you have kids, you have community groups. So how could we offer something to people where they could volunteer in and around their current lifestyle and their current, busyness, I suppose. So we were looking at supporting what we call self-organising volunteers, and that's people who do things, they decide what they would like to do and do it as and when they can. So we ran with the Climate Ready Champions model. This was one of the groups who happened to be all women, but we did have a lot of gentlemen as well, Jim, that just happened to be one of the 5 training sessions we ran. We went with the Climate Ready Champions model as the focus for the project, and this was after the training, which I'll talk about in a minute. I think everyone is holding up their pledge to spread the message. So. Oh, and in the middle there, actually, I'm holding a Climate Ready Communities guide, which I haven't got in the presentation, but I might send the link so it can be included. It's a free guide by the Red Cross about how to talk to people about climate readiness. Yeah, lots of good resources. So the Climate Ready Champions, they are community members. We were careful with our terminology about what do we say. not leaders, although I think of all these climate ready champions as leaders, but I think leaders has the connotations of maybe they are the chairperson of a group, but this could be anyone in a community at all. So we use the term champions. And the key thing for the climate ready champions to hopefully do is to spread the message. This isn't to take away from the fact that obviously the actual actions of being climate ready, you know, putting up shade trees, spreading, making sure you have mulch and having a climate ready home, they're great actions to have, but the role, I suppose, of a champion is about spreading the message. So as I mentioned, all the climate ready champions, of which there are 61 plus a few honorary ones who have found out about the project after the training and were really keen to be involved. So maybe we're sitting around 65. They came to a 1-day or 2-evening training session. And I'll talk about that now. So the training covered climate change very briefly. Actually, most people who came along are on board with climate change. They know the basics, so we cruised through that pretty quickly. And we went into things like the local projections. So this little map here is a heat map. A lot of the councils across Adelaide have flown over with one of those thermal planes and taken imagery. This was in the evening, but after a sort of 35-degree day. And yet they've created these heat maps, of which slowly they're coming online as interactive maps. If you haven't got one for your council area, if you put in heat maps and maybe Onkaparinga or Resilient South, you should get to play with them and you can zoom in and out. It's interesting. No prizes for the big blue dot in the middle is a reservoir. So that's why that's so much cooler. So we use those heat maps as a resource to look at local projections, what's happening now and how might it change. And we talked about our values. There was quite a bit about connecting to values. What do we all love? And therefore, how is that potentially at risk through climate change? And we sort of talked about things we love that might be, you know, bushwalking, your native wildlife, gardening for me, that's something that I love and can connect to others with. And then we said some things may not be at risk with climate change, like, you know, your relationship with your siblings or going to the cinema. So, you know, we talked about what are the things we love, and that's mostly for helping connect to others. We did talk about what it means to be climate ready. What are some of these actions we're talking about? What are some things you can actually do? And I'll show you some of those in a moment. But the bulk of the training, interestingly, from what the champions actually wanted, was to talk about how do I message and motivate other people? It's all well and good to know that the climate's warming and this is how many degrees hotter it might be and this is what I can do, even the actions, but how do I actually message and motivate others? And we definitely did not have the answers to that, but we talked about how can we do that, and part of it was through connecting to values. Then we looked, this little image down here, so spreading the climate ready message, all the champions did a little mind map of people they knew, community groups they knew, where they shopped, their grandkids' school, doesn't matter what it was. And actually people were surprised by how many connections they potentially have out there in the community. And then that's sort of the blueprint of who can I spread this message to? Well, everyone on that piece of paper. Oh, and lastly, of course, the training was as interactive and had lots of activities, and we had guest speakers in, so tried not to make it a dull day. It was, yeah, bit of fun. And so what did that mean to be climate ready at home and in their communities? Some examples of actions. I wish I could make this a bit interactive, but I'll tell you what each icon means. So you can see the little tree there. We talked about an example of if it's going to get hotter, is to be clever with our tree shading. And there's an example of shading in summer, but then letting the sun in winter. So lots of strategies to keep our homes cooler. And that's some of those tangible things to be climate ready. The little diagram you can see, it's actually a phone tree with the little boxes. That was us talking about how with climate change, we're going to have to be more connected and really look at logistics within our life, not just make sure your house is well insulated and things like that. It's actually also about keeping each other safe, looking after each other, knowing who to call if there's a storm or something. So that's what the phone tree represents. It's not the only example. There's the Get Prepared app, which I mentioned before. So that's an example of being climate ready, is also thinking about those one-off extreme weather events. And because the champions are very thoughtful, they obviously thought outside of themselves and their community to think about our native wildlife, and to think about how our flora and fauna are going to cope with climate change. And so how can we help them be climate ready if we can at all? So yeah, we talked about actions like that. So we actually have started putting together a list of 100 things you can do to be climate ready. And like I said, they include home-based things, community-based actions, and physical, tangible things, as well as logistical changes. This is a slide directly from the training, and I just wanted to show you, I'll read it out first. So it says, action ideas, how can we spread the climate ready message to both your networks and your broader community? Remember to connect to values. What are some short-term and quick actions? What are some longer-term actions with more planning, possibly in partnership, and support you may need? So this is an example of what the champions were asked to think about, which is, what are some quick things I can do? I can hashtag on social media and post about my, a shade cloth I put over my carport, thinking about it being potentially 50 degrees in Adelaide sometime. What are some longer term actions I can do? Well, maybe that's an event I can plan with other champions. And what support I may need. So this project was not about come to the training, goodbye, we'll never see you again. This training was about ongoing support, being there through the Red Cross and other organisations. So that's what they had at the end of the day. So what happens now for the champions after the training? We had to keep motivating each other, and me help motivate them. To stay in touch and keep accountable. Like I said, this is a project where we go to, I think you've probably all gone to lots of training events or presentations where you're inspired and informed, but then life gets in the way, and a month or two later you've forgotten all about it. So I was staying in touch with the champions, and still do, via email, a bit via phone, and Facebook and other groups. And sometimes when I would call a champion and say, hey, how are you going? How are you going with that goal you set? They go, oh, yeah, I haven't done that, but thank you for calling me and keeping on my case. So people appreciated, I think, that connection and staying in touch. We encourage conversations. So there is a Facebook group, Climate Ready Communities, which was private for a while with the champions, but as of a week ago or so, it's been opened up, and it is a public group, it's sort of just run by champions and community members to discuss this whole topic. And what happened after the training was support for champion-led projects, which I'll show you a couple of now. To motivate their climate ready champions, we had things like the climate ready bus tour. You can see on the left there, that's actually my little straw bale house, which we tried to design and build to be a bit climate ready. You can see some pergolas, and actually those little strings on the left are growing hops to try and shade the wall. So anyway, we went to a climate ready house. The other photo you can see, we went down to the coastline, and this is actually someone from the council who came out to talk about what the council's doing to prepare. We also went to Gemtree Wines. We got to go to a winery, because the winery is actually really thinking about climate change and what it means for them now and in the future. They're changing the varieties, and I think, so in South Australia anyway, they started off with a lot of French grapes and varieties, and then they realized it's a bit hot for that, so went to sort of the Italian and Spanish, and Gemtree are even looking at some Greek varieties now, so they're getting to where it's hotter and drier and growing grapes accordingly. So yeah, we also went there on the bus tour. Some of the climate ready champions projects include someone wanted to make a climate ready pack, which has some resources, but also has things like some climbing beams to shade, some hydrolyte to keep in case of a heat wave. The little packet there, the SES very kindly gave us some cooling neck scarves for heat, and there's some candles for power outages. We were also kindly given some native plants that would shade, so the actual plant isn't in the photo. But yeah, climate ready packs was an idea from a champion, and they ran with that. And they trialled these at another Champions Open House Day for Sustainable House Day. So we've trialled them, and they're going to try and do another 100 climate ready packs for the community. And these were really to start the conversation. Instead of just walking up to your neighbour and saying, hey, do you want to talk about climate change and getting prepared? It's sort of, hey, I've got this climate ready pack. There's, you know, some bean seeds in here and some hydrolyte and sort of something a bit tangible to talk with. So that was a great idea, a champion idea. The biggest probably climate ready champion idea is a climate ready forum. So that is having an afternoon, you can see the date down there, on the 30th of March, where we will have, we'll delve into topics around climate change in more detail. Like someone wanted to talk about pets. What does this mean for our pets with climate change? Another thing is emotional resilience in the face of climate change. I'm sure you will all feel this very much, but how are your emotions and how is your grief through climate change? So we're going to talk about that. Anyway, there's all these topics we're going to have at the forum. And again, that's a champion-led project. But for this one, there's a working group of about, I think there's about 20 people on the working group, but we probably have about 7 or 8 at any meeting. And they're planning, this event with my support. I suppose I do a bit of the toing and froing and maybe the minutes and organise the meetings, but then it's a champion-led project. So what support is there for champions? Well, we have all these partner organisations are involved. The little coffee symbol is not an organisation. That's that we try and meet for coffee catch-ups that are open to anyone. But you can see that the council's involved there, and the Red Cross as well as NRM, who I mentioned. So working with the councils has been fantastic. A big pro with working with the councils is they do have a bit of extra capacity, maybe than the Australian Red Cross, and potentially more funds, not always, but the Red Cross is being a not-for-profit. So the council are really able to help with lots of things like that, in-kind venues and whatnot. A potential negative, obviously, is that we're restricted to those council areas to a point. So the council obviously wants to focus some of the projects in that area, and that's where they're able to provide support, although we've had people come in from outside the region to come and do training, and that's great. So working with the council has had those benefits and those limitations, but they've been a great group to partner with, and they know this space of climate adaptation really well because they work together already in resilience. There's a little bit more I want to talk to after this, but it's probably only about 5 minutes. I didn't know if Jim wanted to jump in at this point as a climate ready champion and someone who works with council. It's up to you, Jim, but if there's anything you wanted to add at this point about the partnerships of working with them. See.
Sure. Look, I think the theme of adaptation actually connects well with a lot of what local government does already in terms of being an environmental manager, very broadly speaking, you know, protecting people and property from natural hazards. I mean, we often think of climate as being mitigation, but they're traditional local government functions that this project fits in with very neatly. My experience is I've moved into a new community, a new council, and so I've had to become socially connected quite quickly. And with the council, I guess there was a certain amount of red tape. I was quite keen to initiate a project to shade the verge where the previous owners of the property I own, with my wife, had asked the council to remove the olives because they're a fire hazard, and probably they didn't like the look of them. But it's left, a void, and there's no shade. So that's been slow, but in the process I've learned that you do need to develop your network. Things don't happen overnight, and so that's been happening. And with the council election and being involved in fossil fuel divestment campaigning, I'm now a lot better connected with the council and the new leaders in the council. So I think I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have felt as motivated and determined without the training. And perhaps the other comment is that there was a lot of parallels with the training that CCL does in terms of the power of personal connection and and the importance of listening and understanding the values of the people you need to get to have conversations with about climate, whether it's climate preparedness or mitigation.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Jim, for adding that bit. So yeah, I'll just continue on. So what's the future of the project now at this point? So the more immediate future of the next 6 months is to continue supporting the fantastic champions with their projects. And there's quite a few going on in the works. To do an overall review, it's been a 2-year project, so we've done a year and a half. There's half a year left to go, so really it'll be in review stage soon. What worked, what didn't. And from 2019, 2020 onwards, I think the Australian Red Cross are really keen to continue the project and also expand into new regions in an organic way. Just, we don't want to sort of try and go, hey, let's go countrywide and go too big for our boots. So it's just trying to slowly go to maybe some other clusters within Adelaide to see how it works. But all of that is funding dependent. This project was a grant, and we now have to look at opportunities for this to be funded through any grant or sort of corporate sponsorship, council support. We're looking into all our options, but for it to continue, we do have to look at some funding options for it. So the project overview, I'll sort of wrap up with, I love when people do what went well and what isn't going so well. So what's been going well? The project, interestingly, it's really good how it links emergency services and then the environmental, sustainable climate change sort of sectors or organisations, because traditionally they're emergency services focus on their emergencies, and maybe climate change focuses on that. So this really brings it together, and we're having conversations with the CFS, state emergency services, all these emergency services organisations. They're thinking about climate change, and then lots of climate change related organisations hopefully thinking about these emergencies and extreme weather. So that brings it together quite nicely. Another thing that works well, I think, is the champions model. It's a good way to try and get to as many people as possible with a more genuine behaviour change model. Really, if a friend tells you something and starts talking to you about what we're projected for and some changes you could make at home, then you're probably more likely to listen. And so that champions model gets to more people, we hope. And spreads a more genuine message, but it's got its limitations of it's very hard to track that, but we hope it's happening. We'll do our best to review it and track. What isn't going so well, I could probably argue, is also the champions model. So I think overall it does work really well, but it has some limitations. And one of those being what I mentioned about it's quite hard to monitor and track how it's going and how many people are spoken to, although we're doing our best with surveys and conversations. But there's some limitations to it too. Another thing that maybe, I don't know, isn't going so well is, are people ready for this conversation about climate preparedness now and adaptation? I had someone, one of my favourite stories from a training is that I asked people during the training if they had an aha moment. And one person said, I've had an aha moment, and she said, I came to the training thinking we shouldn't be talking about adaptation because it will take away from mitigation. She said, but actually starting to talk about adaptation now and getting ready, and organisations like the Red Cross and emergency services and governments saying we need to get ready, may, for her, spur the conversation about mitigation even more so, because it is becoming more real. So I hope people are ready for this conversation, but it is a bit full on. It can be a bit scary, so we try and keep it action based as much as possible with solutions. But are people ready? I don't know. So that's pretty much a wrap up of the project, as brief as I can give it. I've got my phone number and email up there, so you are all welcome to contact me. And I did think as well, though, if you wanted to contact me about anything outside of Red Cross, because I talked about my straw bale house or anything, you could either contact me through work, but I've also got an umbrella with my other hat on of Folk of All Trades is an organisation, a little business my partner and I started to spread sustainability messages. So I think we've only got Instagram and Facebook at the moment, but yeah, Folk of All Trades. Feel free to find us if it's something more of the sustainability than the climate ready stuff. But yeah, thank you for listening to me, and hopefully I can answer some of your questions.